Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first live webinar in our UPL Insight series at the AGRF Virtual Summit. We are very fortunate to be joined today by two of the leading minds working in the development sector, and we're grateful to you for joining us in this discussion. Today, we're looking at a central question at the crossroads of economic development, social security, health, and environment protection. How can we improve the living income of smallholder farmers across Africa and the rest of the world, many of whom have been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? Although COVID is primarily considered as a public health crisis, the economic effects have presented an immediate challenge for maintaining growing the livelihoods of people growing across the African continent. More worrying still, we're yet to understand the full effect of the pandemic on the social infrastructure, markets, and food security on which life depends. Africa's estimated 33 million smallholder farming families have been one of the worst groups affected by the pandemic. Many were already facing reduced incomes and higher levels of poverty from perennial issues like locust infestations, extreme droughts, and climate change. With more than 400 million African people living below the global poverty line before the COVID, the situation is likely to have worsened now. So, as the global pandemic outlook remains uncertain, the case for empowering and building the resilience of smallholder farmers whilst creating an inclusive food system becomes even more critical. Strengthening the resilience of smallholder farmers is vital to guaranteeing their food and nutrition security, as well as that of the communities they produce for. Otherwise, they stand to experience further suffering when new threats arise. In this context, encouraging crop diversification and enabling increased productivity for smallholder farmers not only remains an attractive and sustainable solution for improving living income, but also appears to be an urgent one too. So the question is, how can we work together to meet this challenge? And to answer that question and share their experiences with us, I'm joined by two of the foremost individuals who are at the center of these very conversations and whose organizations have provided vital support to protect smallholder farmers and safeguard their living income during this testing time. My first guest today is Chris Brett, Lead Agribusiness Specialist at the World Bank. The World Bank has taken a leading role in addressing and acting upon the need for improved livelihood for smallholder farmers across the African continent. Prior to working at World Bank, Chris was the CSR and Sustainability Manager at Olam, working closely with the cocoa value chain across West Africa. I'm also joined by Jennifer Baarn. Jennifer is Head of Partnerships at AGRA and is greatly experienced in the development of public-private partnerships. Before joining AGRA, Jennifer was the Deputy CEO of the Southern Africa Growth Corridor in Tanzania, which we look forward to learning more about as well. So to begin with, I would like to invite Chris to share with us an overview of the World Bank agricultural mandate for Africa and what challenges you have seen in the months following the outbreak of coronavirus in the continent, and to explore some of the work you have been leading in value addition with smallholder farmers. Thank you and welcome, Chris.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a really good opportunity to come and speak at this event. Firstly, my heart really does go out to everybody who's been challenged, by the COVID pandemic. This has been a challenges at a personal level, at an economic level, and a real breakdown of society in many, many places. The World Bank Group, and I do stress the word group, has been put forward a huge economic response to support a Build Back Better campaign globally following this campaign, this pandemic. So firstly, I'd just like to say that the subject here of living income that I'd like to sort of frame my conversation around is so important to us at the World Bank. We consider the whole position of the living income as an important dialogue, an important framework, a way of convening a lot of the public and private sector dialogue. It's not just about income. It's about diversification. It's about economic opportunities. It's about really building such an inclusive approach, an integrated approach. We're seeing vast economic opportunity across the agribusiness value chain. Now, I'm stressed that we're not here just talking about agricultural production. We're talking about value addition, how we work on agricultural inputs, agricultural production, the logistics, the off-farm services, the processing, all the way through to the retail and the consumer. All of these parts have to be really, really looked at. I mean, we call it a value chain, and a chain is as strong as its linkages. And I think this is where the World Bank is really looking at. We're drilling down on how do we build stronger linkages at every single point and ensure that there is equal value, equal opportunity across these chains. There's a lot of anxiety at the moment, and in many ways correctly, really drilling down on who is gaining too much, who is not gaining enough, where is the economic, where is the resilience in these value chains. So having said that as a discussion, the World Bank group has to be considered. I sit in the World Bank, so my clients are governments. I'm working as hard as we can to really strengthen the government's approach to building a real climate smart agriculture, resilient approach to agricultural production. But at the same time, in my job role, looking at this agribusiness approach, how we're really commercializing the smallholders to be more resilient and get local value addition. At the same time, as part of the World Bank Group, many of you are aware of the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, and the IFC obviously works with the private sector. And the private sector does, of course, include smallholders, producer organizations, SME. So a lot of those organizations are gaining from a lot of support the IFC brings in advisory, and our unit in IFC is about upstream, longer term development to build into investable opportunities. Building a pipeline of economic opportunity, not just for the World Bank Group, but for other banks, the African Development Bank, many other international and national organizations. So having framed that out, I'd like to sort of bring this down to a much more stronger level. At the World Bank Group, in the agriculture and food global practice, it's known that we lend $3 to $3.5 billion a year into the agriculture and food global sector. And I would like to assure, the whole audience, this money just doesn't go into the government in a general sense. It's planned in terms of activities, economic support to value add to those countries. We don't want to create debt. We want to create economic opportunity, economic vibrance, jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So about 40% of this money now is going directly into value chain development. We're seeing a huge increase in governments requiring, support in developing good, nutritious supply chains. Those growing domestic markets are raising huge challenges to feed the urban masses, but huge opportunities to integrate producers to consumers. So a lot of our focus has been on the fresh fruits, the vegetables, as well as dairy, looking at proteins such as poultry and now aquaculture, all of these areas to create opportunity. So the other thing, of course, is the cash crops. Never forget how important the cocoa, the coffee, the cashew, the cotton, and all these commodities are to Africa. So a lot of our work at the moment has been looking at, how do we bring more economic opportunity to cocoa farmers in West Africa? We're negotiating and discussing with governments through analytics as well as investable opportunities in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire on really strengthening the cocoa value chain and cocoa farmer livelihoods. And this is really a lot of the forefront of the work on the living income. Sitting around a table and not just talking about cocoa, but talking about living income brings the opportunity to talk about the importance of diversification. We don't want to support, poor, cocoa farmers who are really on the edge of poverty and impoverished without turning around what economic opportunities are there for the cocoa communities. Really strengthening how we can bring diversification. How do we increase yield on existing cocoa farms with creating land opportunity or land areas for further agricultural production, commercial agricultural production. So it's really important approach. It's not about just increasing yield, where yield increases can lead to lower incomes. Yield increase has to lead to opportunities of economic gain. In West Africa, there's huge imports of food, particularly rice, etc. whereas there's large exports of cocoa, coffee, cotton, cashew, and so on. How do we balance this? How do we increase those cash crop production on less land is a fundamental question, and open land opportunities for other production. Just headline numbers. Obviously, I look forward to questions that can come forward and really drill down on some other opportunities we're looking at. But really looking at the opportunity, in the cocoa supply chain, where we're seeing, Cote d'Ivoire, for example, is producing 2.25 million tons to 2.5 million tons of cocoa on about 4 million hectares. The idea is to restructure that to produce the kind of volume of cocoa that we're used to, but doubling the yield on the existing land, and then releasing land for diversification. So just on headline numbers, if we have 4 million hectares of cocoa being done at 400 kilos per hectare on average, why don't we target 2 million hectares at 800 kilos per hectare to increase that viability and release 2 million hectares of land for strong, commercial, good quality agricultural production, which is linked to markets. So a lot of our areas that we're looking at is really looking at innovation, technologies. What do we bring to those communities? We strongly backed our Ag Results program, which we're working with our key donors of the Australian government, the Canadian government, UK government, as well as USA, the US government, and the Gates Foundation, building a way of incentivizing, and I strongly push that word, incentivizing the private sector to engage with smallholders. We've launched the AlphaSafe program across, started in Nigeria and is moving across Africa. Really look at how do we get AlphaSafe, this product which is put into the soil to eliminate aflatoxin, very, very critical to good value maize production, as well as groundnut production and other commodities as well. So we're looking at AlphaSafe. We also incentivize farmers in Kenya to link with the private sector on using these incredibly important storage bags to produce, so farmers actually reduce post-harvest losses to gain more value on their commodity, as well as being able to store longer term and sell at a higher price. So those bags that was put into the markets, we've now produced them at a very, very strong economic model with the private sector, created the smallholder market, and now the smallholders are now buying those commodities direct from the smallholders. And these are through incentives that we've worked with. So these are examples of increasing the market space to increase the living income opportunity, the viable opportunity. The message that I really want to give away to today is, don't put your eggs in one basket. That's a statement which has been going for 300-400 years, and there is a real strong, important point there. Don't invest in one thing. If you're a farmer, be diversified. The markets will always go up and down. When you're on an up, you're on an up, but when you're on a down, you're on a down. We've seen cocoa, coffee prices go down 30%. That has had huge economic impacts, not just on the farmers, but also the whole fabric of society. The whole system slows down. All of the economics that cocoa produced for Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, the value it brought has now actually ended up being more of a liability. So we're working with farmers and governments on this. So the last point I'll say here, and then I'll hand back to Laurent, is the importance of the living income differential, which is now being created by the Ghanaians and Ivorian governments, which we think, of course, is a great way of bringing more value to the product. So the question of the living income differential is, yes, it's $400 a ton of cocoa. That should translate to more money into the system. The importance is that money is being invested wisely within the value chain. What goes to the farmer, what goes to the government, what goes to the cooperative, what goes across the value chain. All these are very, very important questions that we're working through at the moment. But so there's a very clear message that living income is a vital framework for discussion. It's a great way of bringing people around to the table and talk about a subject which is not clearly defined to a commodity. I think that's really, really important. So I'll stop there. I've had my 10 minutes, so I want to stick to time so that we can obviously interact with the audience. And back to you, Laurent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. There's actually a lot that we recognize here from the integrated approach that we lead in our own projects in West Africa with UPL, and especially on the cocoa, promoting more cocoa on less land to open opportunities for diversification. So we very much look forward to continuing this discussion together. This actually brings us on to our second speaker very nicely, and I would like to invite Jennifer Baarn now to share with us some of the work she has led facilitating the inclusive transformation of agriculture, both with AGRA and also previously with her work in Tanzania. Welcome to you, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you very much to be here, and very exciting to hear Chris talk about everything that the World Bank is doing, and really recognizing also the trend of what I can only label as a holistic approach, isn't it? When it comes to agriculture, I'll always say, taking this from my years as a banker with Rabobank years ago, agriculture value chains are sometimes some of the most complex, but also riskiest value chains that we're dealing with, heavily fragmented, and we're dealing with perishable goods, right? So it's very critical to have all the heads in one particular direction. It's very critical that all the different supply chain actors are actually connected to each other, even if you're dealing with more sophisticated economies and supply chains. Now, translate that to the context that we're working in, trying to enhance agriculture value chains and systems that are deprived of resources, capacity, access to finance, etc. And every challenge is actually amplified. And I think it's a strong belief that you will see as a red thread through the work that it's not only that we're doing at AGRA, but also in SAGCOT. It's really about connectivity, alignment, a holistic approach, and an ecosystem approach towards agriculture transformation that is critical. And it is critical because of also the level of urgency, right, that we're dealing with. In a sense, given the demographics, given where we're heading in terms of climate change, etc., the number of people we need to feed, the time is now. And COVID has been a challenge, an unprecedented, I would say, on a global scale, but it's also really a turning point for us to leverage, to start really thinking about how are we going to make that transformation happen. That conversation has already been going on for a few years, but I think we now have an opportunity to also really invest in some of the triggers and the levers that can make a difference. For example, think about digitalization. For example, putting agriculture back at the heart of economic development. So just after this intro, let me just share a little bit about AGRA, because it's really critical for the context of what it is that we're doing and why we think that it's very important, the work that we do in terms of driving agriculture transformation. AGRA was initially established more than 10 years ago by Kofi Annan, and it was really with the focus of initiating the green revolution in Africa. And at that point in time, the thinking was really that the challenge is access to qualified inputs. How do we get our farmers to not only have access to the appropriate seeds and other types of inputs, crop protection, but also that they have sufficient extension services and capacity building to understand how to work on that. And at AGRA, we initiated efforts, program, and activities across the African continent. We helped to establish numerous local seed companies. We worked with researchers. We worked with governments as well to strengthen their capacity, because we believe very much in a strong PPP approach when it comes to agriculture. I'll come back to it later. However, our thinking evolved. And in our last 5-year strategy, we identified the importance of actually the ecosystem approach, even before many actors started labeling it as such. If we want agriculture value chains to work, it's not about siloed interventions as either the back end or the front end. We really have to address quite a number of systems. So we started to labeling our work as complementary systems that we're trying to impact. We're looking at soil health systems. What are the different actors, activities, interventions that are required to improve soil health? We also look at inclusive finance. We look at extension services. We look at inputs, but also last mile distribution, alliances. We look at the connectivity from smallholder farmers to aggregators and processors as well. And across all of these different intervention points, in agriculture value chains, AGRA is really focusing on a couple of activities. One is really trying to mitigate a couple of key risks that we have in the value chain. And number one is the fragmentation. So a lot of our work is around how do we aggregate and integrate many of the services and also the fragmentation of smallholder farmers along the value chain. So for example, in the 11 countries that we work in, we have established in specific regions what we call consortia. These are different value providers, service providers, so to say, being it banks, being it capacity builders for extension services, being input companies, being it our village-based agents who are covering the last miles between input providers and farmers. We're integrating these services and setting up programs where all these different actors are working together and almost forming like one interface to farmers. That has been proven to be critical, so that farmers are not confronted with all kinds of different programs and actors telling them sometimes providing conflicting information. So the consortia model has really been on the ground with the millions of farmers that we're working with, very critical. And it really adheres to what our main mission and mandate has become. We want to improve food security across the African continent and more food autonomy for African economies. And we want to do it in two different ways. We want to strengthen the capacity of farmers to basically grow more food, impact therefore not just only the volume but also the value of the food that is being grown. And secondly, we want to strengthen the capacity of governments to provide a better enabling environment. So the work that we've been driving in the consortia in country has been very critical. AGRA is currently established in 11 countries, working with last year we engaged with 5 million farmers, providing integrated services through many of the implementing partners that we're working with. Traditionally, by nature, we were a grant machine, but and I shouldn't state it like that because we're much more than that. We are a partner to many different stakeholders in the landscape, and we're actually helping to build their capacity. It's very interesting because the 11 countries that we are active in and the regions within these countries that we're active in, they do adhere and align to the agroecological zones that have the potential to be breadbaskets across Africa. So even if you look at our regional presence, it's really about interconnectivity and how can you really drive agriculture transformation by making the investments where they are actually relevant. The consortia model on the ground is one. The second thing actually that we have been very prominent in and that you can also see reflected here at the AGRF is really the engagement with the government. It's one thing to stand at the side and pointing to governments and giving laundry lists in terms of what needs to happen. And we partly do that as well. We identify issues, we do advocacy, etc. But on the other hand, governments also need support in order to build their capacity to create that enabling environment that is critical. One of the things that we've been doing in the past years is supporting governments in identifying and building what we call flagships. How do you translate your national policies into actually investment opportunities that are relevant not only for public investors but also for the private sector? And how do you actually continue to develop this this process so that you also get to the point that you have documentation and pitch ready investment that you engage with the private sector with? That is number one. Number two, that you also have an engagement with the private sector in terms of the relevant policies that will make specific investments happen. So we have really strengthened and evolved that role, not only within the 11 countries that we work across the continent, but also regionally. Recently, we have initiated the Regional Food Trade Initiative, whereby we now are going to look at what are some of the continental linkages between different value chains and how can Africa actually profit a lot more from the new free trade, the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So this holistic approach has really been core to what it is that we've been doing. One of the interesting things that I have specifically been involved in since I joined AGRA a couple of years is really look into how can we strengthen our engagement with the private sector in such a way that we create leverage. And leverage is really, we do realize that given the investments required, the trillions of dollars required, I think 118 billion according to the Rome-based agency to address and to achieve zero hunger in Africa. There's no single institution who can actually do that on their own. If we want to achieve that, we need to partner with others, that is one. But secondly, we need to really catalyze private investments across the landscape. The private sector in itself is a whole system of different players, from your smallest micro entrepreneur who is a village-based advisory working with 50 farmers to your large multinationals in a consolidating industry that is providing a wide range of products. So we as AGRA have really stepped up in terms of how we're partnering with the rest of the landscape to make things happen. Our first and foremost partners are, of course, the farmers we work with in the field. Secondly, it's the government. Thirdly, we've also stepped up and established stronger relationships with many corporate partners, similar as to UPL, etc. And how are we trying to do that? It brings us back to the integrated value chain and the ecosystem approach. Everybody has their role to play. How can we be catalytic and how can we mitigate risk by aggregating services, aggregating different actors, helping to align them, but also providing catalytic funding to those difficult parts where actually either the private sector or others cannot provide funding. Let me give a couple of examples. For example, we've been working with some companies, UPL is an example of that, but also Seedco, where we are linking a variety of service providers, both regional ones as well as smaller companies in country, to our farmer consortia and our village-based advisory, expanding the services for farmers, establishing a variety of demo plots, and therefore enabling them to have better access to services. Another activity that we're doing is linking many of our consortia farmers currently at 5 million to a wide variety of anchor buyers so that they can basically sell their commodities and have better market connectivity linkages. We have also worked on more strongly identifying how can we strengthen what we call the hidden middle. And the hidden middle is really the vast number of SMEs across the continent who are almost like the lubricant of our food systems. And they're providing services, they're providing connectivity, aggregation, etc. to the entire system. So we are also working at the moment with 3,000 different SMEs, but we're stepping also up our efforts to provide them with opportunities to access finance. For example, we're here at the AGRA, where we have almost 3,000 companies, institutions, governments, private investors, and financial institutions in the agribusiness deal room. We're bringing together hundreds of SMEs who are looking for growth capital, being it debt or equity, who have business models that can be impactful to farmers and are linked to the many value chains AGRA and its partners are engaged with. And we're facilitating the matchmaking. We're trying to ensure that there is a pipeline of investable deals within the continent, but also actually of investments and projects that are impacting farmers, because we're working with many of these companies as well. So, sorry, I'm looking at you, Florent, because I think I'm running over my time.
No, thank you, Jennifer. That's great. I wanna save some of your energy and examples for later in the conversation, and also some time to maybe answer some of the questions that we are seeing popping in the chat box. No, thank you for this great explanation on the ecosystem approach, and we also very much look forward to further collaboration with AGRA on our projects, especially on the village-based advisor, improved access to inputs and technologies and technical assistance. So I want to turn back to Chris now with a more specific question. You know, Chris, we wanna find some answers today on how can we improve the portion of added value that goes into smallholder farmers' pocket. I think that subject is key to you. So let me give you a few examples. At UPL, when launching an innovative technology, like for example, the first biostimulant for cocoa, delivering up to a 30% yield increase, we have a clear value proposition for the farmers and a clear 3-to-1 return on investment. But we often face what we call the risk aversion barrier of these farmers. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So as you know, traditional farming methods generally lead to low productivity, so low profits, and therefore low investments. So beyond better inputs and technologies, how can we improve the business model for smallholder farmers? Does it mean that we need to create better value chains around the farmers?
Well, I mean, this is really such an important point. I mean, a lot of our focus has been, I mean, I'm going to use the word commercialization. We've got to get farmers obviously being put into groups, organized into communities. As Jennifer quite rightly said, there's a huge fragmentation across these smallholders. If we try and keep the conversation live in terms of cocoa in West Africa, it's a subject. I'm working on multiple products. Don't think of me as just a cocoa person. That's one thing I want to stress. But cocoa is a very, very good example of the challenges of changing a very, very traditional system. Cocoa notoriously has had a real lack of investment for many, many years. It was actually regarded as what we would call an orphan crop in terms of research and development. Not a lot has happened. It's a smallholder crop. It's considered to be quite a low value to some of the major research institutions in terms of commercializing what they can sell and produce for smallholders. So what we're trying to look at here is this risk of increasing huge volumes if that's going to lead to the price decline. Organizations like the World Bank is very, very looking at data and numbers constantly of supply and demand of markets, so we can really try and produce production to a vibrant market. So I think what we're looking at here, when it comes to cocoa in particular, we've spent a lot of time really, really trying to bring smallholders into viable commercial groups. The concept of co-ops is a legalized institution in places like Côte d'Ivoire, but more so in Ghana, we work with producer organizations. So bringing structure. The idea of bringing structure is to be able to actually train and support farmers through a transition. This word transformational change is really, really key, but we don't see that. We see a step change. We don't see people suddenly jumping from one step to another, which is unfortunate. A lot of traditional farmers are very risk adverse, and they're very, very slow technology adopters. So to answer your question here, there's got to be the whole point of building the asset value around producer organizations. We've been trying to support the development of good quality warehouse structures, extension delivery services that work out of the warehouses, linking these warehouses to very, very simple systems inside the warehouse structure. What does that mean? It means things like adding solar drying systems, low technology, but drying the cocoa bean to ensure that the quality is improved, to ensure that the quality parameters can improve the price to the off-taker that those groups are working. We see a much stronger integration now between producer organizations to off-takers. And those off-takers now are getting really better structured, where you can talk about these big supply chain companies who are off-takers, but the way they integrate to brands has encouraged brands to put a lot of investment into the system through the producer organizations. For example, we see the Nestle Cocoa Plan. We see Mars investing very, very heavily through the system. So this is really a way of producing sort of long-term agreements. We're also looking at our warehouse receipt model, which encourages more finance, more investment. If we can ensure cash flow and finance into those systems at early stages, it enables a lot more investment. It gives banks a way of, strongly de-risking. The World Bank has been putting a lot of emphasis on building capacity of local banks to lend into the agricultural sector. We capacity build the banks, we de-risk a lot of the work the banks do, and we encourage them to on-lend into the agricultural sector. Jennifer quite rightly said about building a pipeline of investable opportunities, but behind that pipeline, de-risking is very important. So we have to look at value addition. The co-ops have got to be stronger than just cocoa. As we go into a diversification model, those co-ops should be supplying equipment, machinery, input, machinery to help the development of the diversified crops, particularly food crops, as well as, of course, inputs at good viable prices because of scaled up buying, and improving the value addition of the products through those asset developments. So very, very strongly the model of integration. Also, as we talk about technology, a lot of our investments has been in a whole breadth of technology to link the value chain. This famous blockchain that's talked about a lot, bringing transparency, bringing accountability, bringing traceability across, and giving very strong financial support through that. But also technology being used to promote transparent pricing, technology to be used to produce weather warnings, disease warnings, all those kind of things. So we're investing heavily in that sector. I think the other thing that's been really exciting in Nigeria and Ghana has been the Uberization of the tractor services. And I'm really personally excited about that. And the World Bank has backed hugely these tractor kits, which have been made available to smallholders. So, you know, it's great that a smallholder can sit with an app, put up there into the cloud, I want this service on my farm to come and plow or cultivate a certain hectare. There's a competition process, and then the service is given to cultivate that farm. That's really transformational on sharing costs, etc. But more importantly, and I'll stop on this because I know I want to hand over back to you, Laurent, is that it engages the youth. The youth love technology. The youth love the machinery services. So the youth are really getting involved, back involved in vibrant agricultural, commercial off-farm services. And this backs to my original point. We have to add value addition, and value addition is not just on the farm, it's off the farm as well, you know, the service provision. So the Hello Tractor model, as it's called in Nigeria, has been hugely relevant. We've backed the procurement of more than 5,000 tractor kits for that model, and that's really working, and it's commercial. There is a return to the tractor supplier, and it's bringing a much more mechanizational approach to agriculture. Earlier planting catches the rainy season, catches the yields, particularly on the food crop into market. So these are really important parts. I hope that answers your question there, Laurent. Thank you.
That's more than I expected. Thank you so much, Chris, for these very insightful examples and very illustrative ideas. I want to ask quite a similar question to Jennifer on you know, how can we improve the portion of added value to that goes into the smallholder farmer's pocket, and building on your previous intervention where you were saying that the goal of AGRA is to transform national policies into investment opportunities. I want to invite you in your answer to explain us a bit on the drivers of inclusive agricultural transformation that I think it is dear to AGRA's heart as well. You need to unmute yourself, Jennifer.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep the noise limited when Chris is talking. So I think a couple of things, right? I think first and foremost, it starts with leadership commitment. And it's leadership commitment from a corporate perspective, but definitely also from a public perspective. And that's really what we're advocating for. And commitment always translates into a couple of things. It translates into what resources are being made available. So we are challenging and encouraging governments to live up to the Malabo Agreement and ensure that they allocate the funding towards agriculture and agriculture transformation that is critical. So that's one. Secondly, from a corporate leadership, and that goes for SMEs from the smallest to the largest, it's really the commitment in terms of, are we willing to design those inclusive business models that will lead to a triple bottom line and will impact smallholder farmers, will also be holistic in a sense that they will be sustainable. And also specifically look at vulnerable groups, such as do they bring gender equation to agriculture value chains. So first and foremost, it starts with that. And I think also secondly, it's really about partnership and alignment, and how do we co-design those interventions that are required and that are critical to make that transformation happen. So we are working with our partners as well to ensure that there are certain ethical guidelines in terms of when we're co-designing not only program, but also activities, but also to have some hard targets in terms of what is it that we want to do in terms of impacting the farmers and the smallholders that we're working with. What are the short-term, what are the long-term impacts, and what is it that we need to do to also ensure that this is sustainable? Because it's not necessarily public investments or an AGRA in perpetuity that will ensure that this inclusivity happens. It is also that we make sure that it becomes an integral part of the type of business models that we are, and commercial models that we're putting out there into the ecosystem. So I would say that is really critical to what it is that we're trying to achieve. And still at the moment, the fragmentation that we're experiencing just on the ground, it's almost similar in terms of how we are approaching this subject. When I used to work in SECOT as well in Tanzania, you would come to a specific cluster that has a significant agriculture potential. but an investor was building a plant here, the government was building a road there, and then you had a development partner who almost completely disconnected had a smallholder program. How do you bring all those actors together from the beginning so they can leverage their funding and actually create synergies, and from the get-go have principles of inclusivity integrated in terms of how they are approaching their activities in a particular region? Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm really glad because I don't even need to ask the questions coming into the chat box. You're already answering it, so that's perfect. I also wanted to ask you a bit on to elaborate on the Sourcing in Africa platform, which is a very interesting initiative that we hope will turn into great achievements very soon. And we've been following that very closely at UPL. So can you please explain us in a nutshell what it is and how this approach to public-private sector can deliver lasting change for smallholder farmers?
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you also for coming on board and being a champion in that respect. So Sourcing in Africa is really focused on how can we increase local sourcing from African smallholder farmers for several reasons, because of the impact that we would like to have, but also, of course, food security and autonomy for many of the countries and the regions as a whole, and the region as a whole. It's not necessarily a new concept. Many of the off-takers and anchor buyers, and Chris also alluded to it, they have strategies and targets and ambitions to basically increase the sourcing that they do from smallholder farmers, from the large brewers to some of the smaller off-takers and aggregators. The challenge that they often run into is the amount and intensity of interventions that are required along the value chain, from getting the appropriate seeds, the appropriate knowledge to farmers, making sure that also in terms of logistics, the entire value chain is organized. So it's quite interesting. At the last AGRF in the deal room, we had 15 of the largest anchor buyers in West Africa in the room, from your Dangote, your Nestle, some regional and national players as well. And their ask was actually very simple. They said, for the past decade, we've been trying to improve our sourcing from farmers, and we're hitting a ceiling. And we're hitting it for two reasons. One, demand is growing faster than supply. And secondly, we as companies are not able to address structural challenges in the supply chain. And one of the interesting challenges towards us as your AGRA, your World Bank, your TechnoServes, etc., was your services are not integrated enough and not providing holistic or silver bullet solutions to us. Your service in terms of public funding to support us in achieving this local sourcing is not integrated enough. How can you work together to have a more integrated service offering? And that was a very interesting and very big ask, but it was a very clear ask. So what are we trying to achieve with local sourcing? We are trying to work with our partners in development to really handpick and identify those projects, opportunities, investments, anchor buyers where we can rally our resources around and to support them in fixing their value chains. And it means that we're going to look institution by institution, who can do what, where, when, what are the gaps, and what do we need to co-design for new interventions to happen. Because we have the resources, the insights, the knowledge, but it takes me and Chris sitting together and basically figuring out what between our organizations we can do to supply the commercial players better and to help our farmers out there.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. I want to enter into our maybe last question. I want to ask you both because we're soon running out of time. First, Chris, about COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think this pandemic will fast-track efforts to rework and reshape the food system in itself? And if yes, what should this new food system look like, please?
Well, I mean, that is the really big question. I mean, I'm a very bullish person. I'm an optimist, and I can know that the way a lot of rallying around, not just with the international community, but alignment with national governments, and of course with the very important private sector, we're seeing a huge opportunity to build back better. We look at healthy planet, healthy food, and we look at the healthy nutrition approach to our work. I think what's really important is that building the resilience going forward is going to be critical. I feel so concerned about the global situation we live in, and my heart goes out, not just because of COVID. We've had the double whammy of the locust issue in East Africa,
Yes.
which has also gone and affected North Africa and the Middle East region. These are huge problems. I mean, tackling locusts is there. So I don't want to divert, so I'm just saying there is many issues. The World Bank has been building up a very strong response. We did an emergency response of $14 billion. Of $9 billion went through to governments to help strengthen their health delivery, as well as putting liquidity and cash into the system. And $9 billion went through the IFC to support private sector clients. We did not want to see the whole systems disrupt and crash. And my biggest concern was not the fact that when COVID kicked in, there was an awful lot of food in the system. It was making sure that food got through to markets. So we did not see an increase in food insecurity. But my other concern we have now is we are seeing evidence that input markets are getting disrupted because of COVID. Now, if farmers don't have the resources or access to inputs, then we're just postponing a food insecurity crisis until the next season. So we really have to work strongly. We're building a huge economic response as a World Bank group. A lot of that will be focusing on the agribusiness sector. I'm working on very strongly de-risking of banks. It's not just about getting money out there, it's giving the banks confidence to put money. We're trying to look at how we can defer some of the SME loans that are existing, so that those SMEs can have the opportunity to strengthen their business models and performances to be able to repay loans going forward. So the other thing to be really clear on is that it's still today, we have to commercialize and integrate smallholders. I think Jennifer's point was really critical. I want to just sort of throw out some numbers that we've looked at, and I can't tell you that they're exact. Data is confusing, but we have about 500 million smallholders globally. And out of that 500 million, we can say 8 to 9% are linked directly to off-takers. 8-9%. That is so small. I mean, we need to get that number up. Now, integration brings finance, integration brings technology transfer, integration brings the more value locally, the original questions that you were answering me. So I'm really concerned about that number. I want to see that number grow massively as we build that better. So a lot of the thing that I'm doing is really working on really the agribusiness approach, not agricultural production, agribusiness. So that's the other thing. And the last thing I want to say is that we, just to revisit back to the local income debate. Now, I'm going to throw out a number. People can challenge me. I mean, I just want to put something out there that when you look at minimum wage, across the world, I mean, and then you look at living income across the world, you can say, generally speaking, particularly in emerging economies, we're seeing a gap of about 40% between minimum wage and living income, 45%. Now, the COVID pandemic could be making that gap even bigger. So, we are looking at this with our poverty teams. We do a lot of household surveys, et cetera. We look at local economics, and that kind of thing. So the World Bank is a go-to data point. But to start looking at this kind of number, 40 to 45% differential, I mean, those are things that we have to express a lot of concern around. So, I'm a positive guy, but I'm also looking at the numbers, which is worrying me a lot. So I'll stop there, Laurent. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'll have a last question to Jennifer, and I'll try to hit two birds with one stone if you're happy to help me with that.
Okay.
AGRA's focus this year and specifically on the AGRF is how to feed the cities. So my last question was, what should these new food systems look like? And we have received a question in the chat box as well, which I would like you to address on to improve probably local sourcing and feeding the cities with a more sustainable value chains. How can we make locally produced products more competitive? Because there's often this clearly this competition with imported goods. So please, in a nutshell, that will be our conclusion remarks for today.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. before actually going into that, I just wanted to add something to what Chris said. Chris mentioned that actually our farmers have been challenged, of course, by locusts, by the pandemic. I would like to add a third whammy to that, Chris, and that is actually climate change and the weather dynamics that have either caused drought or floods anywhere. So basically, there are a couple of things that are very critical. Coming to your question, how do we make our food systems more competitive? And I think the answer, the solution, the beginning of both problems and solution is with our smallholder farmers. We need to empower and build better systems around our smallholder farmers. And that actually means also strengthening, empowering all the different actors in this ecosystem to work better with our smallholder farmers, right? So it means also working with anchor buyers and help them to strengthen their local sourcing mechanisms. It means working with SMEs to improve basically their capacity to impact their environment and better link to smallholder farmers. It means co-designing systems around smallholder farmers that makes them an integral part of our value chain. So that is definitely one, and that is basically the viewpoint of AGRA as well. Our starting point is with smallholder farmers and how can we improve the ecosystem for them to be an integral part of agriculture transformation. Having said that, though, there's some very interesting aspects that are also coming up even during this AGRF. And let me just give a bit of an out-of-the-box example. We had a speaker on one of our panels in terms of how can you build a trillion-dollar industry, agribusiness industry in Africa. And it turns out that when it comes to, for example, developing cold chain technology in Africa itself, we are not producing the building material in country. So by definition, establishing certain value chains in Africa will cost more than any place in the world. And part of their vision is to work with partners and investors to make sure that cold chain technology, building construction material and value chains are becoming more competitive. And their vision is to build several plants in Africa that can actually supply not only the agriculture sector, but also the construction sector. So it's really out of the box thinking as well that will support us in actually becoming more food secure and looking at the local market. A second thing is also just the political and the leadership commitment coming from governments. There are still a lot of things that need to happen in terms of harmonization that are hampering our traders and our farmers to access markets competitively, even regionally. And we really have to prioritize that. And I think the COVID pandemic has really painfully exposed that lack. And I think thirdly, everything that has to do with data and the digitalization of data. And it doesn't only mean with regards to some of the initiatives that Chris, for example, mentioned in terms of what it is that you can do with data. It's also taking a step back and thinking also from a policy perspective, what do we need to do to create a framework and the infrastructure to make sure that the decision making can actually be faster, be quicker, and can be beneficial to the actors in the value chain. And of course, we also have to look at other aspects such as financing. And these are also the things that we as AGRA are working at. How can we actually provide better access to finance for a wide range of actors within these value chains so that they can improve their businesses and achieve those growth strategies that they're aspiring. So there's not one single answer. I think it's a range of activities and interventions that are required. And as the head of partnership, my answer is always, it starts with the co-design, the pre-alignment, the partnership, the collaboration, and the leadership commitment to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm very frustrated that I have to end this conversation today because I feel we could keep on talking for hours, and it's true that we've not touched all the elements of the answers on how can we improve the living income of smallholder farmers. But I hope everyone enjoyed it. So I want to thank you very much today again, Jennifer and Chris, for joining us on that very insightful conversation. I invite our audience to find out more about UPL work on sustainability by clicking on the link in the description of this video. And you can also subscribe to this channel to follow our full podcast series for the AGRF. Thank you very much and see you soon.